My son-in-law stood at the villa gate shouting to the neighbors, "My father-in-law has gone crazy. He won't let anyone into the house." And my daughter, on the other end of the line, screamed through the phone, "Dad, you're embarrassing me. The whole family is laughing at me." I didn't shout back. I just looked toward the sea, where sunlight hit the face of my late wife's pocket watch, the second hand frozen at 12:07. In that moment, I understood. When trust dies, time stops, and justice begins with a click. The click of the 911 call, the click of the file I opened, and finally the click of the old watch, when it started ticking again, was the moment my daughter learned her first lesson about boundaries. If you've ever wondered whether you were too cold for setting boundaries, remember, sometimes true love begins with knowing when to stop. Keep this story as a small tick in your mind, to remember that justice isn't always loud. It comes when you're calm enough to say, "That's far enough." If these words made you pause, subscribe, so each week you're reminded that gratitude and limits still have a place in this world. The first sound I heard that day wasn't the waves, but my son-in-law screaming in the sea breeze, "The father-in-law's gone mad. He won't let us in." His voice rang sharp and furious, bouncing off the white walls of the new villa like an accusation. When I stepped down the gravel path, he was already there, Nathan Lowe, with 2 friends, 3 suitcases, and the arrogance only the spoiled carry. Behind him, the Pacific stretched endlessly, silver under the afternoon sun. The wind carried salt and the smell of fresh paint from the porch. The house glowed in the golden light unique to Carmel by the sea, its cream walls gleaming like porcelain. Carmel by the sea had always been the dream I promised Margaret, my late wife, that one day we'd live there. When she passed, I kept that promise, spending all my savings and my remaining shares from the watchmaking firm in Sacramento to buy this villa on the hill overlooking the Pacific. Its price, $2,800,000, had once made me hesitate, but my financial advisor said, "You can afford it, Edmund. You've been cautious your whole life." The house had been handed over only 3 days ago. The cedar floors still smelled of polish. Meanwhile, my daughter Clara and her husband Nathan were still living in my old Sacramento house, rent-free for 5 years, never paying a dime of taxes or utilities. Perhaps that's why they felt entitled to come here, as if every roof I bought was automatically theirs. I could still smell the cedar from inside, the scent of newness and freedom. The pocket watch Margaret had given me 30 years ago glinted in my hand. I had promised, when its second hand moved again, that would be the place where I truly belonged. Nathan spoke first, his tone slick, rehearsed. "We drove 6 hours, Edmund. Clara said you'd be thrilled we came early. She booked the guest room, said we could stay a month." He smiled, but his eyes were cold. 3 bedrooms this big. We're staying. Won't bother you." His 2 friends, Brandon and Kyle, glanced at each other uneasily. The travel bags sat on the porch beside the beach chairs, still tagged. I stayed silent, letting the sea breeze flow between us. "I didn't invite you," I said evenly. "This is my house, not a hotel. Pack up and go." Nathan sneered. "Don't overreact. Clara said you'd be happy. A family vacation, right?" I don't recall agreeing to that. I set my briefcase on the step, opened it, and straightened the purchase documents, still bearing the fresh notary stamp from 3 days ago. "You should leave." His jaw tightened. "Are you serious? Clara said you were generous." I looked out at the pelicans gliding over the surf. Family doesn't show up unannounced, with luggage. His friends exchanged glances. Brandon murmured, "Maybe we should find a motel." But Nathan pressed on. He pulled out his phone. "I'll call Clara. She'll clear this up." He switched to the speaker so I could hear. After a few rings, my daughter's firm voice answered, "Nathan, what's going on?" "Your dad locked the door, won't let us in. He says it's his private house." "What?" Her pitch rose. "Dad, what are you doing? They drove all day. You're embarrassing me." I took a breath, all the lonely years of fatherhood flooding back. "Clara," I said slowly, I never agreed to this. You never asked. Don't start, she snapped, icy. If you humiliate my husband like this, don't expect to be called family. The call ended with a long tone. Nathan stared at me, smile gone, eyes hard as steel. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, old man. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence weighs more than shouting. I stood on the steps watching them gather their things like evicted squatters, then took out my phone and dialed 911. My voice to the dispatcher was calm. 15 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. No siren, no lights. A middle-aged officer stepped out, badge reading Kowalski. He listened patiently as Nathan spun his tale of a family misunderstanding. When he finished, the officer nodded, then turned to me. May I see proof of ownership? Of course. I handed him the deed, notarized and recorded 3 days earlier. He studied it, compared the name to my license, then asked Nathan, Do you have any lease, contract, or written permission to stay here? It's family property, Nathan blurted. My wife said we could stay. He's my father-in-law. Is your wife's name on the deed? No, but... Then she has no authority to grant you access. You're trespassing. Please pack up and leave immediately. His two friends needed no more convincing. They dragged their bags down the steps. Nathan stood frozen, face flushed. You're taking his side? We came for a family reunion. Kowalski stayed neutral. Please comply, sir. Nathan slammed his suitcase, metal snapping. Fine. Enjoy your empty house. He glared at me. You just destroyed your own family. I said nothing, watching their SUV fade down the coastal road. When its hum dissolved into the surf, Kowalski handed back the papers. All in order, Mr. Pierce. Congratulations on your new home. After he left, silence settled in. I stood on the porch, the mix of paint and salt in the air, the keys cold in my hand. For the first time in 40 years, I had a place wholly my own, untouched, unquestioned. Yet Nathan's last words echoed, You destroyed the family. Inside, the house felt vast and empty, like a clock newly assembled but unwound. I set the pocket watch on the kitchen counter, its second hand still frozen between ticks, waiting for the right moment to begin again. Outside, the ocean breathed steadily, and within these walls, time seemed to stop. I still remember the summer of 2001, the year we opened our first watch workshop, a small store with a hand-carved sign that read, Pierce Timepieces. Back then, Margaret was still healthy, and Clara was only 12 years old. Inside the shop, the scent of metal mingled with machine oil. The gears turned with a rhythm like a heartbeat, and the midday light shone through dusty windows. Dad, Clara said, her tiny hands touching the pocket watch I was fixing, one day I'll build you a big house by the sea, where you can listen to the waves instead of ticking. Margaret laughed softly and stroked her daughter's hair. If you keep that promise, then your father will stop working and just sit listening to the waves. I remember looking at them, both of them, and feeling the world shrink to fit perfectly into that moment. The laughter, the ticking, the light sparkling on the glass. I didn't know then that moments like that would become the rarest luxury of my life. The years rolled on like the second hand on a dial. The workshop grew. We received orders from San Francisco to Zurich. But no mechanism is as delicate as the human body. When Margaret's cough worsened, I thought it was just a cold. 6 months later, the doctor said lung cancer, terminal stage. I don't remember how I lived through those days, only her voice, weak yet calm. Edmund, when you hear a clock stop, don't be afraid. Sometimes time pauses so people can learn how to keep living. After she passed, I sold the workshop, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bear the ticking in an empty room. I invested all the money from the sale into quartz oscillation technology, the kind that made electronic watches accurate to 1,000th of a second. Maybe I was chasing something flawless, something that couldn't betray me like people could. Clara was in college then. I paid for everything, tuition, rent, even a short study trip to Paris she had begged for. When she married Nathan, I thought I was helping her start a life. I gave them the old house in Sacramento, where Margaret and I had lived for nearly 30 years, mortgage-free, taxes and utilities covered, just so they could have an easy beginning. "Once we're stable," Nathan said, "we'll start paying you back." 5 years passed, and they never mentioned it again. The day they officially moved in, the house changed. New curtains, laughter, fresh paint, dinner with wine. That very day, Margaret's pocket watch suddenly stopped. I was standing by the living room window, watching them carry boxes through the doorway, when I heard a faint sound in my hand. The second hand caught, and then fell silent. I looked down. It had stopped at exactly 12:07, a quiet marker of the moment they stepped out of my arms and fully into their own lives. Maybe the spring had worn out, or maybe it just ran down. But I felt it was an omen, as if something inside me had stopped moving, too. I had meant to wind it, to bring it back to life, but stopped myself. I wasn't ready to hear that ticking again, the sound of dinners with everyone present, and of Margaret laughing, saying, "We'll grow old listening to this clock." I closed the cover gently and placed it in the oak drawer by my desk. I didn't lock it, but I never opened it either, like a wound left untouched, for fear that even a light touch would make it bleed. Now, in the new villa, I opened the watch for the first time in years. Light glinted off the tarnished silver dial, where the engraving still read, "Time is only true when it's shared." I stared at the frozen hand, a cold thought rising in me. If time stops when trust dies, maybe it was time for it to stop for good. Outside, the sea wind hissed through the cracks, carrying salt and a hint of jasmine from the porch. I closed the lid, hearing a soft click like confirmation. On the kitchen table, the house purchase papers still lay there, the corner marked by the shaky signature I had written 3 days earlier. I picked up my phone, opened the contacts, and scrolled to a name saved for years but never dialed. Patricia Winter, attorney at law. My finger hovered over the screen. I took a deep breath, feeling the waves sync with my heartbeat. Then I pressed call. A warm female voice answered, "Law Office of Winter. How may I help you?" I replied slowly but firmly, "Hello, this is Edmund Pierce. I need legal advice about protecting my property and about the boundaries of a family." 3 days after the call with my lawyer, I began a familiar task, inventory, not of goods or revenue, but of goodwill spent. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. The first line read, "Clara and Nathan support expenses, 2019 to 2024. Beneath it, row by row, the columns began to fill. Annual property taxes, electricity, water, internet, roof repairs, heating system replacement, and repainting the living room. 5 years, over 173 lines of data. Each line was a moment I chose silence. Each number is an act of patience framed in memory. When I sent the file to Patricia by email, she replied almost immediately. "Excellent, Mr. Pierce," she said during our video call the next morning. She sat behind a dark wooden desk, sunlight streaming through her downtown Sacramento office window. "What you've compiled is clear financial evidence. Legally, they're not tenants. They're licensees, meaning they're permitted to stay temporarily without paying rent." I nodded. "So I can ask them to leave without going through the full eviction process?" "Exactly," Patricia said, her tone professional and steady. "Under California law, you can issue a 3-day notice to quit, requiring them to vacate within 3 days. If they refuse, we'll file an unlawful detainer with the court. Once the judge grants the order, the county sheriff enforces the writ of possession. Every step is legal and documented." I wrote every detail in my leather notebook. Notice date, April 15th. Deadline to vacate, April 18th, 11:59 p.m. She reminded me, "Be sure to list the address, full names, and sign exactly as in the grant deed. Even minor discrepancies could let them counterclaim." I printed the notice and signed it. The ink trembled, not from hesitation, but from realizing I was signing the end of an illusion, the illusion that family needs no boundaries. That afternoon, I drove from Carmel to Sacramento. The road cut through the Central Valley, lavender blooming along the slopes, tall power lines stretching endlessly. I stopped before the house that had once been my pride, its paint now peeling, grass grown high on the porch steps. Nathan's car sat crooked in the driveway, blocking the path. The door swung open hard, nearly hitting the wall. Nathan stepped out, a half-finished beer in hand, foam dripping down the can onto the tiles. The sunlight flashed on his dark frames, but his eyes were bloodshot with anger and exhaustion. "Oh, you're early," he sneered, a smirk twisting his face. "Here to film another kick the son-in-law out video? Or maybe call the cops again? Give the neighbors a show?" His voice rose, sharp with mockery. "You humiliated me in front of my friends, in front of the whole block, and now you dare show up here? Who do you think you are, Edmund? A saint?" "I came to deliver this." I pulled an envelope from my jacket. "A legal notice requiring you to vacate within 3 days." He laughed, long and mocking. "You're threatening me now? We're family, not tenants. No law makes a daughter leave her father's house." "I'm not threatening," I said, voice steady as a clock hand. "This is a legal process, signed under counsel's supervision." He looked at the paper, his smirk fading. "3 days?" he repeated, reading aloud, then glaring up. "3 days to leave the house you gave your daughter?" I didn't react. 3 days is the statutory period for licensees. After that, I'll file an unlawful detainer. If you resist, the sheriff will enforce the order. Nathan scoffed, the sound sharp as metal scraping tile. "You think you're playing judge now? All your life you've turned screws, and now you think you're delivering justice." I didn't respond, just took out my phone and opened the camera app. I didn't record his face, only the porch area and the document in my hand. Enough to prove delivery. Patricia had advised, "No audio, just video. California's a 2-party consent state." I hit record and gently set the notice on the wooden patio table. "This is the original copy," I said clearly. "I've delivered it as required. I'll return on the 18th. Nathan stepped forward, snatched the paper, read a few lines, then tore it in half, then in thirds, fragments fluttering like out-of-season snow. He lifted his head, a cold smile forming. 3 days? You don't have the guts." I watched the scraps swirl away in the wind, strangely calm. I once feared losing my child. Now I feared something else, losing myself. I picked up the largest torn piece, slid it into the backup envelope, and noted in my journal. April 15th, notice delivered, torn on site. Video proof recorded. Then I turned and walked toward my car. Behind me, Nathan was still there, chuckling softly, the hiss of a beer can opening following me like the sound of a challenge. The next morning, when I opened my email, I saw a notification from the Sacramento House's HVAC system. The warning light blinked red, displaying a cold message. "System offline. Manual disconnect detected." I had paid for regular maintenance. There was no reason for it to fail on its own. I called the local technician service. The person who answered said they'd send someone over the same day. By 2 p.m., I received a report by email, a PDF file with photos of the circuit board. The final note made me sit still. Invoice number 88217. Service call, $850. Technician note. Wires deliberately pulled from thermostat unit. Manual damage detected. It wasn't a malfunction, it was sabotage. I reopened the front door camera footage. The video had no sound, just this timestamp at the corner. 11:47 a.m., April 16th. Nathan stepped out of the front door, circled the porch, and disappeared behind the corner where the HVAC unit stood. Minutes later, he returned, phone in hand, glanced around, and went back inside. Nothing else, but it was enough. I plugged in a flash drive, exported the clip, saved it, and copied it to another USB. I labeled it in my familiar handwriting. HVAC, damage, April 16th, evidence. Everything went into the document box, locked securely. That afternoon, I called Patricia, Her tone was calm but precise. Mr. Pierce, with this evidence, we can pursue criminal charges. This falls under California Penal Code 594, vandalism, deliberate property damage. Family or not, it's still a crime. I recommend you preserve evidence, keep a timeline journal, and avoid direct contact. I have the camera footage, the invoice, and proof of my location in Carmel, I said, flipping open my notebook. April 16th, 2 p.m. I was home in Carmel. I have a credit card receipt from the grocery store nearby as a timestamp. Perfect, Patricia said. We'll wait for the notice to expire. If they don't vacate and continue to damage property, I'll file the unlawful detainer, along with the criminal complaint. Stay calm, Mr. Pierce. They're testing whether you'll back down. I closed the notebook, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve, not anger, but the weary clarity of documenting your own family's misconduct. That night, I brewed tea and replayed the footage. The image was cold, silent. Nathan in a gray shirt, bending over the unit, pulling wires. I paused the frame, zoomed in. I remembered the camera system had been installed at the insurer's request during the property appraisal, meant for asset verification, not surveillance. Nathan, having lived there for years, likely never noticed that beside the ceiling, light was a tiny lens no bigger than a fingertip. He pulled the wires, unaware his act was captured. A drop of sweat fell onto the keyboard. I wiped it away, saved again, naming the file, When Trust Breaks, frame 47. The Carmel night was silent, broken only by the wind tapping the glass. I wondered, perhaps people don't lose their integrity in a single day, but in small acts, like pulling a wire and pretending ignorance. 3 days later, on April 18th, the notice expired. No one left. I received an email from Patricia. Prepare documents. We file the unlawful detainer tomorrow. I nodded, though no one could see, and closed the laptop. Then the phone rang unexpectedly. The screen showed Clara's name. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Dad? Her voice trembled. Not angry, but pleading. I need to see you. Alone. Why? Silence for a few beats. Then she said softly but clearly, I'm pregnant. I froze. The only sound left was the wall clock counting each slow, heavy second, as if time itself were waiting to hear what I would say next. The small cafe on J Street still kept Sacramento's old charm, white-painted brick walls, oak tables, and the strong aroma of roasted coffee drifting out to the sidewalk. I arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table where sunlight slanted through the window onto the wood. The server recognized me, perhaps by my gray hair and worn brown coat, nodded politely, and left. I ordered nothing but a cup of black tea. 15 minutes later, the door opened. Clara walked in. Her eyes were dark with fatigue, her hair tied carelessly, a white envelope in her hand. She scanned the room, saw me, and came over to sit. No greeting, no warmth in her eyes like when she was a child, only exhaustion and distance. Dad, she said softly, her voice hoarse, I need to show you this. I stayed silent as she slid a photo from the envelope, a black and white ultrasound image, grainy, indistinct, a small white dot in a sea of gray. She placed it on the table like a hidden card. I just had an exam this morning. The doctor said, I'm almost 7 weeks. I didn't look immediately. I watched her trembling hands instead, though her eyes searched mine, not pleading, but testing. I turned the image over. No doctor's name, no date, no hospital details. It was an image anyone could find online. I remembered the call at the villa weeks ago, Clara's shaky voice through the phone. I'm pregnant. If you do this, I'll lose the baby. And now the same act, just with a new prop. I set the ultrasound down and looked up. Clara, I said slowly, if you truly are pregnant, prove it after you leave the house. Bring the real papers, a real doctor's name, and a real exam date. Then I'll listen. Her eyes widened as if I had crushed her entire performance with a single sentence. You don't believe me? I believe facts, not images printed from the internet. I replied, calm but cold. Her voice cracked. "You're choosing a house over your own daughter. You promised to protect me." A gust of wind blew through the window, making the ultrasound flutter on the table like a meaningless scrap of paper. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window, where noon sunlight reflected off the car glass. And in that moment, I remembered Margaret, her final afternoon in the hospital, when she held my hand and whispered weakly, "Edmund, you can forgive, but never let anyone use your love as a weapon. When love is exploited, it stops being kindness. It becomes the rope others tighten around your neck." I closed my eyes, hearing her words again. When I opened them, Clara was already standing. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice rising, tears falling, but strangely hollow. "I swear you'll regret losing me forever." I didn't watch her leave. Only the ultrasound remained on the table, the edge damp, maybe from her tears, or maybe from my tea, I couldn't tell. I folded it, slipped it back into the envelope, and paid the bill. Outside, I paused at the door, taking a deep breath. The Sacramento noon light was harsh, glinting off the pavement like metal. I realized I no longer felt guilt or fear, only a sense of clarity. That afternoon, when I returned to Carmel, I opened my inbox. A new email from Patricia awaited. The subject simple: "Prepare for unlawful detainer case." The first line read, "We will file tomorrow at 9 a.m. All evidence has been verified. Do not contact them again. It's time to let the law speak." I nodded and closed the laptop. Outside, the sound of waves hitting the rocks filled the air. I looked at Margaret's pocket watch on the table. The hands were still frozen at 12:07. Time had stopped, but this time I knew why. Because the only thing left to trust was the truth. Monday morning, 2 days after the court hearing, I had just poured my coffee when the phone rang. A call from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. The woman's voice was calm, steady, the kind of tone used by someone who had done this hundreds of times. "Mr. Pierce, the writ of possession has been approved. We'll post the 5-day notice on the door today. If they don't vacate within that period, we'll return to enforce it." I answered, "Thank you. I understand." That afternoon, the front door camera recorded a middle-aged deputy taping a white paper with bold black letters. "Sheriff's notice to vacate. 5 days." The paper fluttered in the wind, the crisp sound of tape stretching audible even in the footage. Clara opened the door moments later, stared at the notice, then tore it down with trembling hands. Nathan followed, said something sharp. She turned away and covered her face. That evening, as I returned to Sacramento to sign final documents with Patricia, the phone rang again. "Dad," Clara's voice broke, "please, give us more time. Just a few more days. Nathan just found a job and I don't know where to go." I stayed silent. Those words once softened me, but now they sounded like distant echoes. "Dad, at least let me pack properly, please." I drew a slow breath, eyes on the document before me. Writ effective. May 18th. The print was cold and final. "You have 5 days," I said quietly. "No one's taking your time, except you." There was a pause, then only a sigh before the call ended. Day 1, they didn't move. Day 3, the camera caught Nathan bringing home a case of beer, friends arriving, music blaring until midnight. Day 4, Clara sat on the porch staring at her phone, her face hollow, eyes dry. Day 5, the notice still clung to the door, edges curling, sunlight fading the ink. Friday morning, 9 o'clock. A white sheriff's SUV parked in front of the house. 2 deputies stepped out, their voices professional, emotionless. "Mrs. Clara Lowe, Mr. Nathan Lowe, we're here to enforce the writ of possession. You have 2 hours to remove personal belongings." The camera recorded everything. I stood across the street, silent. They moved frantically, stuffing clothes, toys, and photo albums into their car. Nathan slammed the door, shouting, "Congratulations, you won! Hope you're happy with your victory." I said nothing, as their car rolled away, leaving only dust and the fading hum of the engine. I walked toward the house. The air inside was strangely still, the smell of old wood, faded paint, and time itself. I looked at the wall clock, the one I'd hung back when Margaret was alive, and saw the second hand stopped at 11:57. 3 minutes to midnight. 3 minutes before everything became the past. I stood for a long time, then opened the door wider. Sunlight slanted through the curtains, glinting off the wooden floor. My footsteps echoed softly. The living room was in disarray. Broken glass, bottles, peeling paint. In the kitchen, burn marks near the outlet. A cabinet door hung loose. I walked slowly, as if through the ashes of memory. In the master bedroom, the room Margaret and I once shared, the air was cold. The wooden dresser stood open. The top drawer, where I had kept her pocket watch, was empty. The watch had stopped the day I gave it to them at the house. Now it was gone, the day they left it. I stood still, hand tightening, not with anger or hatred, but a hollow quiet, as if the last tangible piece of Margaret had been taken with them. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. May 18th. They are gone. The house remains, but time does not. Then I closed the notebook and looked up at the noon light streaming through the old window, painting faded walls in gold. In that beam, dust particles floated gently, silent as memories that no longer had a place to rest. I returned to the Sacramento house the next morning, carrying a damage inspection sheet and my notebook. The moment I opened the wooden front door, the smell of burnt paint and melted plastic rushed out, sharp and bitter, like the breath of an anger not yet gone. Sunlight streamed through torn curtains, casting red streaks across the peeling wall. Beautiful in a cruel way, a reminder that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The living room looked as though a small storm had passed through. A family photo frame had fallen, its glass cracked like a spiderweb. The sofa was splattered with paint, the carpet marked by round black burns from cigarettes. On the dining table, white porcelain bowls lay broken neatly in half, arranged as if someone wanted to leave a message. This is what remains after trust shatters. I walked slowly, careful not to step on the shards. In the kitchen, burn marks spread near the outlet. The wall darkened, still smelling of melted plastic. In the corner, the wooden cabinet was crooked, drawers pulled out. Room by room I checked. A broken window, rusted handles, bookshelves unscrewed. Each trace told a story, a way for them to release a rage they didn't know where else to aim. I sat at the table and opened my notebook. Paint and carpet, $1,250. Electrical and kitchen fixtures, $980. Damaged furniture, $640. Doors and windows, $930. Estimated. Total damage, $3,800. I wasn't angry. Anger doesn't pay invoices. I called the local police non-emergency line, my tone steady. "Hello, I'd like to file a property damage report. I have video evidence and a full list of losses." The dispatcher asked for the address, then said, "We'll send an officer to make a report. You'll need it for insurance processing." 2 hours later, a young officer arrived. His name tag read, Harris. He carefully photographed each corner, taking notes, then asked, "Do you suspect anyone, Mr. Pierce?" I looked around the house I had painted myself, repaired the roof of, hung my wedding photo in. "No suspects," I said quietly. "Only regrets?" He nodded, his voice softening. "I understand. I've seen this before. People only destroy what they once thought was theirs." I signed the report, and he tore off a copy for me. "You can forward this to your insurance company. They usually process within 7 days. After he left, I stood at the doorway, looking down the old hallway. Afternoon light poured in, red and warm, reflecting off the uneven walls like fading fire. Burnt bridges, I thought, bridges they had set ablaze themselves. 3 weeks later, the house was repaired. Fresh cream paint on the walls, polished wood floors, the acrid smell replaced by wax and cedar. When the contractors left, I stood in the living room again, the yellow light falling evenly on smooth, unscarred walls. The house had been restored, but it was no longer mine. The Sacramento market was strong. The agent said, "You could get around $685,000 if we list this week." I looked toward the front yard where the old oak still stood, its shadow stretching across the brick steps. "Do it," I said. "This house has done its job." A month later, I signed the sale contract. The pen glided over the page, blue ink drying in a slow fade. I thought I'd feel empty, but instead there was relief, like the last knot had finally come undone. That afternoon, I met Patricia again at her Carmel office. She placed a new file in front of me, thick but neatly bound. Charitable Remainder Trust. Edmund Pierce, donor. She explained, "If you sign, the sale proceeds will go to the Monterey Veterans Support Fund. A portion of the income will be paid to you annually, and the remainder will pass to the foundation after your lifetime. All are exempt from estate tax." I turned to the final page and saw the printed line. Veterans Foundation of California. Beneficiary. I signed my name, the ink steady. When I stepped out of the office, the setting sun glowed against the glass doors, the red of dusk spreading over the distant sea. I paused on the steps, watching my reflection merge with the old buildings. And in that moment, I understood. Some houses aren't built to be lived in forever. They exist to teach us the final lesson about boundaries. Saturday afternoon, Carmel was wrapped in a honey-soft light. The breeze from the ocean carried salt and roasted coffee through the air. I was browsing books in a small shop in Carmel Plaza when I heard a voice behind me. "Dad?" I turned. Clara stood there, thinner, her hair tied hastily, her face pale as if she'd just come through a winter without sunlight. She wore a gray sweater, clutching a small bag, her eyes both hesitant and pleading. "I just need 10 minutes, she said quietly. I glanced around, then nodded. "Seaside Brew's still at the corner. Let's go." The cafe sat on a slope facing the sea, its glass doors tinted gold, oak tables catching the light, an old jazz record humming in the background. I chose a corner seat where sunlight streamed through the blinds, striping the table in long amber lines. The waiter brought 2 cups, black tea for me, a latte for her. For a few seconds we said nothing, listening only to the sound of spoons against porcelain. I reached into my bag and took out Margaret's pocket watch, the one that had stopped twice in my life. I set it on the table between us, the silver face catching the sun like a fragment of time caught between generations. Clara looked at it and gave a small, sad smile. "I remember that. I used to fall asleep to its ticking." I didn't reply. She clasped her hands together on the table. "Dad, I don't know where to start. After leaving Sacramento, I realized everything I'd lost. Nathan's gone. He left debt and lies. Our apartment was repossessed. I've been staying with a friend near Salinas. I deserve it." Her voice trembled. "I thought you wanted revenge, but I was wrong. You just wanted respect, and I never gave you that." I looked at her silently. The sunlight slid across her wrist, where a faint scar still showed, a reminder from the day she fell in the workshop as a child, when Margaret bandaged her, and I promised I'd never let her be hurt again. I'd kept that promise until she began hurting herself. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking, "not for losing the house, but for making you see me as a stranger. I want to make things right, even just a little. I'm not asking for money or forgiveness, only for you to know I'm trying to live honestly." I looked down at the watch. Its hands were still frozen at 11:57, the time they'd left the house. I brushed my finger over the cover and said slowly, "Clara, time doesn't stop for anyone. It just waits to see what we learn after losing too much." She nodded, eyes wet. I continued, my voice low. "Time is earned back, not given. It only moves again when you deserve it, not when you beg for it." She lowered her head, as tears fell, landing on the oak table, spreading into small circles. In that moment, a faint sound broke the stillness. The second hand of the pocket watch moved once, then silence. But that single tick was enough. We sat, quietly, letting the sound of the distant waves mix with our breathing. The sunlight turned amber, falling across Clara's clasped hands. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't mean returning. It means laying the final stone over a burned bridge so you know you'll never cross it again. I stood, placing a bill on the table. "This one's on me," I said softly. "Consider it the last time we share tea." Clara bowed her head. "Dad, thank you for listening." I nodded. "Hold on to that. Gratitude is where things can begin again." When I stepped out, Carmel's evening light poured over the street, a faded gold-like memory. The cafe doorbell chimed faintly behind me, then fell silent. I didn't turn back. That night, back at the villa, I set Margaret's watch on the desk. The second hand now stood at 11:58, one tick further than before. I sat by the open window, letting the sea breeze carry salt and jasmine through the room. My phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Clara, thank you for listening, Dad. I'll live well and let time prove it." I read it, set the phone face down, and didn't reply. Outside, the ocean breathed steadily, and somewhere in the quiet, I thought I heard the watch move once more. Enough to remind me that forgiveness isn't forgetting, but knowing exactly when to stop. Late November in Carmel carried a strange kind of peace. Morning mist settled over the red-tiled roofs, and droplets clung to the window frames, reflecting the weak sunlight of an approaching winter. I brewed a cup of black tea and sat by the window, watching small sparrows land on the railing, pecking at the thin layer of dew as if searching for memories of a warmer season. The phone buzzed, a message from Ruth, Margaret's cousin in Fresno. She wrote, "I heard from someone in Salinas. Clara and Nathan are separated. He left 3 weeks ago with credit card debt and a canceled lease. Clara's working at a flower shop now, renting a room on her own. Seems she's trying to start over." I read the words slowly, then set the phone down. I didn't feel happy or sad, just that quiet sensation when a breeze turns the page of an old book, knowing the chapter has ended, though the scent of ink remains. 3 days later, I met with Patricia Winter again at her office in downtown Monterey. The room looked the same: dark wood desk, shelves lined with files, a window overlooking the sunlit bay. On her desk lay a thick folder, the first page printed boldly: "Edmund Pierce Living Trust. Final Revision." Patricia looked at me over her silver-rimmed glasses, her tone firm but calm. "Mr. Pierce, this is the finalized version. Your current estate, after taxes and liquidation of the Sacramento property, stands at approximately $4 million. Under the new directive, $3.2 million will go to the Veterans Foundation of California, and $800,000 will be held in trust for Clara, to be released only after your passing. She won't have access to the principal, only to annual disbursements, managed by the foundation." I nodded. "That's enough. I won't let her lack for anything, but I also won't let her forget the lessons she had to learn." Patricia smiled faintly. "I believe Margaret would approve." She signaled for the notary to enter, a white-haired man wearing a badge reading "Notary Public of California." He placed a thick record book on the desk and spoke evenly. "Please confirm your identity and sign each page. I'll record the time and affix the seal afterward." I handed him my driver's license and signed the original in 3 copies. Each stroke of blue ink dried slowly, leaving deep impressions like the grooves of a life that had come full circle. When the notary pressed his crimson seal onto the paper, Patricia said softly, "It's official now, Mr. Pierce. No one can alter it anymore." I leaned back and drew a deep breath. In that moment, the steady ticking of the office clock filled the room, solid and deliberate, as if time itself agreed that everything was now in its rightful place. A week later, I found an envelope in my villa mailbox bearing the Veterans Foundation of California logo. Inside was a letter printed on heavy paper. Dear Mr. Pierce, your contribution has allowed us to complete our winter housing initiative. 12 veterans will have new homes this year, thanks to your generosity. The bridges you've built will outlast time itself. Veterans Foundation Representative. I placed the letter on the desk beside Margaret's pocket watch. The evening sun slanted through the window, glinting off the metal face. The second hand quivered, not moving, just trembling softly like a quiet breath. Perhaps it was listening to another sound entirely, the sound of peace. Late that night, as I prepared to turn off the lights, my email alert chimed. A new message appeared on the screen. From Clara Lowe, claraloes.mail. Subject, Dad, I'd like to see you one last time. I stared at the line for a long while. The cursor hovered over open, but I didn't click. I shut the screen, leaving the room lit only by the golden glow of the desk lamp. Outside, the sea wind grew stronger. The waves beat steadily against the cliffs, like the heartbeat of someone learning to keep living, not forgetting, but no longer looking back. I spoke quietly to the wind, or perhaps to Margaret. Time doesn't return what's lost. It only teaches us to hold on to what remains. Then I closed my notebook, turned off the light, and let the sound of the waves blend with the breathing of the house, a rhythm soft enough to know that everything was, at last, beginning to mend. Dawn in Carmel was as soft as a whisper. The first light of day slipped through a thin veil of mist, tinting the red rooftops and the distant shimmering sea in shades of rose. I brewed a cup of black coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The ocean breeze carried salt in its chill, brushing gently through my silver hair like a quiet greeting from the new day. In my hand was Margaret's pocket watch, the one that had stopped 3 times in my life, when she died, when Clara left, and when justice had to speak. The silver face was worn, its tiny scratches catching the morning light, like lines of time etched into human skin. I set it on the cedar railing, right where the sun's first ray touched. For a few seconds the second hand stood still, a fragile pause as if the world were holding its breath. Then tick, tick, tick. The faint, steady rhythm began again, slow but sure, as though time itself had been forgiven. I sat in the wooden chair Margaret had once loved and looked out to sea. The water shimmered pale gold, waves breaking in calm repetition like an old song played again at the right tempo. On the table beside me, my laptop was open, its screen showing one unread email. From Clara Lowe. The first line appeared clearly in the preview pane. Dad, I don't need a reply. I just think one day I'll understand. Thank you for letting time move on, even after I made it stop. I stopped there. I didn't open it. I didn't reply. Some things don't need answers to be understood. Outside, the sun had risen fully. Light passed through the face of the watch, casting a thin beam across the railing, like the pulse of justice, quiet yet unwavering. And in that moment, I understood. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance restored. In time, in the heart, and in silence. I closed my hand around the watch as it ticked steadily, the rhythm mingling with the sound of the waves. Each tick whispered a reminder. Sometimes justice is knowing when to let time stop and when to let it run again. I looked up at the sky and smiled. The light glinted off the watch face, flashed once, then faded into the morning sea breeze. If you've ever had to rebuild your boundaries, ever felt pain from kindness misunderstood, but still chose dignity over bitterness, then this story is for you. Share it, so someone out there might know that silence can also be a form of justice, and boundaries don't destroy love, they protect it. Follow, turn on the bell, and comment on the city you're listening from. Because sometimes one story at the right moment is enough to help someone find their way back to themselves.